Imagine waking up every morning to the sound of plastic slamming against concrete. That was my life for weeks. My trash bin rolling into the street, cracked and broken, with garbage scattered across my yard. At first I thought it was raccoons or maybe some careless teenagers. But when I checked the camera I had quietly installed by my porch, my jaw dropped. It wasn't animals. It wasn't random kids. It was my neighbor Karen and her teenage son taking turns smashing my bin like it was some kind of sick game. Karen had been a thorn in the neighborhood for years, loud, entitled, and always looking for a fight. But this was a new level of petty cruelty. She'd wait until late evening or early morning, strut over with her son, and together they'd kick, tip, or even drag my bin out into the road. The boy laughed while Karen smirked like she owned the world. I tried talking to her once. She shrugged and said, "Maybe you should buy a sturdier bin." That smug grin made my blood boil. I knew then that confronting her wouldn't work. She thrived on conflict, so I decided to fight back in a way she wouldn't see coming. For weeks I planned. I wasn't going to scream or argue. I was going to outsmart her. When someone keeps pushing you, the best revenge isn't loud or messy. It's quiet, clever, and undeniable. And by the time I finished, Karen would regret ever touching my property. What she didn't know was that her reign of petty destruction was about to come crashing down. And the best part, everyone in the neighborhood would see the truth with their own eyes. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I brushed it off as an accident. My trash bin was lying on its side in the middle of the street, lid cracked, wheels scraped raw against the pavement. It was early morning, and I was rushing to work, so I simply propped it back up, muttered about how flimsy these plastic bins were, and drove away. But when the same thing happened again the following weekend, then again a few days later, I began to wonder. At first, I blamed raccoons. They had been spotted around the neighborhood before, rummaging through trash bags and scattering garbage across lawns. It wasn't hard to imagine a couple of hungry critters tipping my bin in the middle of the night. But there was something different about the way mine was always positioned. The lid wasn't just open, it was broken, as if someone had stomped on it. The wheels weren't just worn, they were bent like someone had kicked them deliberately. One Friday morning, after cleaning up spilled coffee grounds and eggshells from my driveway, I felt frustration bubbling inside me. This wasn't random. It felt personal. That suspicion gnawed at me enough that I decided to set up a small security camera near my porch, angled toward the curb. It was a simple motion-triggered device I had used once during Christmas to catch package thieves. I didn't think much would come of it. Mind. But when I reviewed the footage the next day, my jaw tightened. There she was, Karen, my neighbor from across the street, walking confidently toward my trash bin like she owned it. And with her was her teenage son, a boy I had seen often riding his bike too fast down the sidewalk, always with that arrogant smirk that mirrored his mother's. Together they tipped my bin onto its side. The boy kicked it for good measure, laughing as it clattered onto the asphalt. Karen stood with her arms folded, smiling as if she was proud. Then they both strolled off casually, leaving my garbage scattered behind them. For a few moments I sat frozen at my kitchen table, staring at the laptop screen. I replayed the footage again and again, each time feeling the anger rise higher in my chest. It wasn't just vandalism, it was deliberate humiliation. And the worst part, they looked like they were enjoying it. I wanted to march across the street that instant, shove the video in Karen's face, and demand an explanation. But I knew how that would end. Karen wasn't the type of person who admitted fault. She was infamous in our neighborhood for her confrontations, screaming about property lines, filing petty complaints with the HOA, gossiping loudly about people's business as though she were queen of the block. If I went to her, she would twist the story, deny everything, maybe even accuse me of harassment. So I forced myself to take a deep breath and close the laptop. Anger wouldn't solve this. I needed patience. That entire day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept picturing her smug face in the video. The way her son laughed like breaking my things was the funniest game in the world. It wasn't just about a trash bin anymore, it was about respect, or rather, her complete lack of it. When I came home that evening, I walked to the curb to retrieve my bin, which I had left out for collection. The lid was cracked worse than before, a jagged line running down the middle. I ran my hand along the brake, shaking my head. This wasn't going to last much longer. That night, I pulled the screenshots from the footage and printed them out. Clear as day, you could see Karen and her son standing over the tipped bin. I slipped the papers into a folder and tucked it into my desk drawer. Not yet, I thought. Evidence was only powerful if used at the right time. Still, I couldn't help but stew over it. Why target me? I had barely spoken to Karen outside of the occasional wave or polite greeting. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. At least, not until now. Maybe she didn't like where I parked my car. Maybe she envied the new fence I had installed. Or maybe, simply put, she enjoyed making others miserable. The following weekend I tested a theory. I stayed up late on Saturday, lights off, watching from my upstairs window as midnight rolled around. Sure enough, I saw them again. Karen and her son walked casually down the driveway, whispering and chuckling. He pushed the bin with his foot, expecting it to topple, but this time I had wedged it between two concrete blocks. It wobbled, then righted itself. The boy frowned. Karen told him to try again. He shoved harder, and the bin tipped, but not as is. Frustrated, he kicked it twice more before they walked away. The sound of the plastic hitting the ground echoed through the quiet night. I clenched my fists, every part of me itching to fling open the door and catch them red-handed. But again, I held back. No, let them think they were winning. The more they did it, the more proof I'd gather. Back inside, I watched the live feed from the camera and recorded every second. Their arrogance would be their downfall by the time I finally went to bed. A plan was forming in my mind. Something quiet, clever, undeniable. Something Karen wouldn't see coming. For now, I let her believe she was in control. But I knew the truth. I had the power. And with every push, every laugh, every smug glance toward my ruined bin, she was digging her own hole deeper. The game had started and I was ready to play. Asterisk. The following week, I couldn't shake the image of Karen and her son treating my trash bin like their personal toy. Every time I walked outside, I found myself glancing across the street, half expecting her smug smirk or his mischievous grin. And every time my eyes lingered too long, Karen would wave with that fake sweetness she used on neighbors she thought she could manipulate. I forced myself to wave back, but inside, the anger simmered. I knew simply catching them on camera wasn't enough. People like Karen thrived on denial. Even with footage, she would twist the story, claim it was kids being kids, or worse, say I was harassing her by filming. I needed something stronger, something that not only stopped her but exposed her completely. That Saturday morning, I drove to the hardware store, a place I usually visited only for simple errands like buying lawn fertilizer or light bulbs. But this time, I wandered the aisles with a very specific purpose. Reinforcement. I wanted a trash bin that could withstand her son's kicks and Karen's pettiness. I walked past rows of plastic bins, all identical to the flimsy one I already owned. No, those wouldn't do. I needed something tougher. Finally, tucked in the back of the outdoor section, I spotted a heavy-duty galvanized steel trash bin. It was solid, industrial-looking with reinforced hinges and thick metal sides. I leaned against it and felt the weight immediately. It wasn't something a teenager could casually knock over. As I stood there, running my hand along the cool metal, an idea sparked. Strength was good, but what if they tried to drag it away instead? I didn't want to just protect the bin, I wanted to catch them in the act. That's when I wandered into the electronics aisle and found a small GPS tracker. It was marketed for keeping track of bikes or luggage, but it was compact, durable, and easy to hide. Perfect. At checkout, I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement, like I was preparing for a secret mission. By the time I loaded the bin into my car, I was already imagining Karen's face when her little game blew up in her hands. When I got home, I wheeled the new bin to the garage and carefully set it up. I installed the GPS tracker inside a hollow space near the base, tested it with my phone, and smiled when the dot appeared on the map. Then I reinforced the lid with a latch and gave the bin a fresh coat of dark paint, so it looked less shiny and new, less suspicious. By evening it was ready. That night I placed the steel bin at the curb, right where the old one had stood so many times before. I sat by the window, lights off, waiting. My heart thudded in my chest as the clock crept past midnight. Sure enough, I saw two figures approaching, Karen and her son. They moved casually, as if walking to admire the quiet street, but I knew better. The boy reached the bin first and gave it a playful kick. Nothing happened. He frowned and kicked again, harder. The bin barely rattled. He pushed with both hands this time, expecting it to topple. Instead, it groaned under the strain but stood firm. From my window I had to cover my mouth to keep from laughing. The boy tried again, growing frustrated, his sneakers squeaking against the pavement. Finally, with a grunt, he managed to tip the bin slightly, but when it fell, the crash of metal on concrete rang out across the street like a gong. The sound was so loud that porch lights flicked on from 2 houses down. Karen hissed at him, glancing around nervously. "Believe it," I heard her snap. The boy scowled, clearly annoyed he hadn't won this round. Together, they slunk back across the street, vanishing into their house. I leaned back in my chair, a grin spreading across my face. Step 1, success. They were frustrated, and frustration would only make them try harder next time. Over the next few nights I kept up my quiet watch. Sometimes they didn't show, but when they did, it was always the same. The boy would shove or kick, only to find the bin unmovable, his efforts echoing in the night. Karen would bark at him to stop, then usher him back home. Each time, I recorded everything. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they escalated. People like Karen didn't give up easy. They pushed and pushed until they got what they wanted or until someone stopped them cold. That moment came the following Thursday. I had just gotten comfortable on the couch when my phone buzzed. The GPS tracker had sent an alert the bin was moving. I pulled up the app and saw the dot shifting down the street. My pulse quickened. They were dragging it, grabbing my jacket. I slipped out the back door and followed at a distance. The street was quiet, but up ahead I could see them, silhouettes under the streetlights. The boy was hauling the bin along awkwardly, its metal scraping against the pavement, while Karen walked beside him, arms crossed, whispering instructions. I hung back, careful not to be seen, my phone recording from my pocket. They dragged the bin almost half a block before tipping it onto its side at the corner. The boy kicked it one last time, laughing breathlessly. Then they left it there and walked back home, smug as ever. I waited until they were gone, then walked up to the corner, lifted the bin upright, and checked the tracker, still working perfectly. I wheeled it back to my property, every step fueling my determination. This wasn't just mischief anymore, it was deliberate harassment, and now I had undeniable proof. Back inside, I loaded the new video onto my laptop. The footage showed everything: the dragging, the tipping, the kicks, and even Karen's voice carried faintly through the night. Watching it, I felt a rush of satisfaction. The trap was working, but I didn't rush to reveal it. Not yet. Timing was everything. For now, I let Karen and her son think they had the upper hand, not realizing they were handing me all the evidence I'd ever need. As I closed my laptop that night, I couldn't help but smile. Karen thought she was clever, but the game was shifting. Slowly, quietly, the power was moving into my hands. The storm was brewing, and when it broke, Karen wouldn't know what hit her. For a few nights after they dragged my new steel bin down the block, Karen and her son seemed to vanish from their late-night routine. I didn't know if it was because of the noise it made, or if Karen had decided to cool off for a while. Either way, the quiet gave me a chance to breathe, though I never truly relaxed. Every evening as I placed the bin by the curb, I lingered at the window, waiting, but silence never lasts with people like Karen. Sure enough, by the following weekend I spotted her across the street, arms folded as she watched me wheel the bin out. Her son stood beside her, hands shoved in his hoodie pockets, smirking. They didn't move toward it that night, but their looks told me everything. They weren't finished, not by a long shot. Sunday evening confirmed it. Around 11, when most of the neighborhood was asleep, I saw the two of them creeping down the driveway again. This time, Karen seemed more cautious, scanning the street as if she suspected someone might be watching. The boy, impatient as ever, strode straight toward the bin and gave it a hard shove. It barely moved. His frustration was visible even from my upstairs window. He tried again, putting his weight into it, but the heavy steel resisted him like before. The metallic scrape echoed faintly, and he cursed under his breath. Karen stepped forward, hissing something I couldn't make out, then grabbed the handle herself. Together, they tugged and shoved, straining to drag the bin down the street. I watched in disbelief. Grown woman and her teenage son wrestling with a garbage can in the middle of the night. They managed to move it a few feet before giving up, panting in frustration. The boy kicked the side of the bin, wincing as the solid steel hurt his foot instead. Karen shot him a glare, then motioned him back toward their house. I couldn't stop myself from grinning. Their petty game was falling apart. The bin wasn't breaking, the kicks weren't working, and the whole thing was backfiring spectacularly. But instead of feeling satisfied, I felt something else creeping in anticipation. This wasn't just about protecting my property anymore. It was about exposing them, letting everyone see the kind of people they truly were. The next morning, I decided to test just how far they'd go. I left the bin slightly tilted, making it look less secure than it was. I even placed a bag inside that rattled with bottles, just enough to tempt them. Then, I set up an extra camera angle across the lawn, capturing the street from a wider perspective. That night I didn't have to wait long. The motion alert buzzed my phone at 12:17 a.m. I pulled up the live feed and saw them again. Karen whispering sharply, her son rolling his eyes. He gave the bin another shove, and when it clanged loudly, a dog 2 houses down began barking furiously. Lights flicked on in another neighbor's window. The boy panicked, grabbing Karen's arm, but she stubbornly tried to yank the bin again. What they didn't know was at this time, the second camera caught not only their actions but their faces clearly under the streetlight. The evidence was undeniable now. By the time they scurried home, I was laughing quietly in the dark. They had gone from smug confidence to frantic desperation, all while handing me more proof than I could have hoped for. The following day, as I rolled the bin back from the curb, my neighbor from 2 doors down, Mr. Hayes, called out, "New bin?" he asked, nodding toward the steel container. "Yeah," I replied casually. "Needed something sturdier. The old one kept getting damaged." He frowned, glancing across the street. "Funny, isn't it? Things like that don't just happen by themselves." I smiled knowingly but said nothing. Sometimes silence said more than words. Later that afternoon, I reviewed the footage again, saving clips to a folder labeled evidence. With each video, the narrative grew clearer. This wasn't a one-time prank, or even a streak of childish mischief. This was a deliberate, repeated campaign to harass me, and soon, the whole neighborhood would know. Still, I didn't want to rush. Timing mattered. If I revealed the footage too early, Karen would spin her excuses, cry about being harassed herself, and maybe convince a few gullible neighbors. But if I waited until the moment was perfect at the next HOA meeting, perhaps it would corner her completely. In the meantime, I continued my little psychological game. Each night, I placed the bin in its usual spot, as if daring them to try again. And each night, I watched from the shadows, collecting every scrap of evidence. Sometimes they stayed inside, glaring at me from behind their curtains. Other times they gave in to temptation, and I caught them making fools of themselves on camera. It became clear that the son was losing patience faster than Karen one evening. I overheard him shouting on their porch, his voice carrying across the quiet street. Something about "it's just a trash can and why do we even care?" Karen's reply was muffled, but her tone was sharp, insistent. Whatever reason she had for this bizarre vendetta, she was determined to keep pushing. And that suited me just fine. The more she pushed, the harder she would fall. By the end of the week, I had hours of footage, each clip more damning than the last. My steel bin stood strong, unbroken, while their dignity eroded night by night. My plan was working better than I'd dared hope. But as I sat at my desk one evening, sorting through the recordings, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had been a menace to the entire neighborhood for years, starting fights, spreading rumors, filing complaints. People tolerated her because confronting her was exhausting. But now, I had the chance to give everyone proof of what she was really like. This wasn't just personal payback. It was justice. The next HOA meeting was only a week away. I marked the date on my calendar with a red circle. That would be the moment. Until then, I would let Karen keep playing her little game. Let her son keep wasting his energy on a steel bin he couldn't dent. Let them believe they still had the upper hand. Because when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be me laughing. It would be the entire neighborhood in Karen. She'd never see it coming. The week leading up to the HOA meeting felt like a slow boil. Every time I rolled the steel bin to the curb, I could feel Karen's eyes burning into me from across the street. Sometimes she'd stand in her driveway with her arms crossed, pretending to check her mailbox or water her plants, but her real focus was obvious. Her son, on the other hand, seemed less eager now. He avoided eye contact and rarely joined her for their late-night adventures. I suspected he was growing tired of the whole thing. But Karen, she was relentless. On Tuesday night, I decided to test her one more time. I left the bin outside as usual, but this time I intentionally placed it just slightly closer to the edge of the road, making it look as though it might be easier to tip over. I set both cameras to record, then settled into my darkened living room with a mug of coffee. Determined to wait, at 12:41 a.m. my phone buzzed with the motion alert. I tapped the live feed and saw her alone this time. Karen was creeping down her driveway, glancing left and right like a thief in the night. She reached the bin and gave it a shove. It didn't budge. She shoved again, harder, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. When that failed, she crouched down, grabbed the handle, and tried to drag it. The scrape of steel against concrete was loud enough to wake the neighborhood dogs. I couldn't help the grin spreading across my face. Watching her struggle with something so trivial was both pathetic and satisfying. She wrestled with it for nearly a minute before finally giving up, muttering to herself as she stormed back across the street. The footage was gold. Not only did it capture her perfectly under the glow of the street lamp, but it showed just how obsessed she'd become. I clipped the video, saved it, and added it to my growing collection. The following day, I noticed something different. As I pulled into my driveway after work, I caught sight of two neighbors chatting with Karen by her front yard. She was gesturing toward my house, her voice loud and sharp, her expression animated. They nodded politely, but their eyes kept flicking toward me. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases like harassing me, camera pointed at my house, and unfair treatment. I sighed. It was classic Karen trying to control the narrative before the truth came out. She was spinning the story, painting herself as the victim, but what she didn't know was that her every accusation was about to collapse under the weight of undeniable proof. That evening, I reviewed my recordings again, making sure each clip was clear, time-stamped and saved in multiple places. I organized them in order. From the first night they kicked over my plastic bin to the latest video of Karen failing miserably to drag the steel one. Each piece built the case, like bricks in a wall she couldn't climb over. Still, part of me couldn't resist tightening the screws a little more. Thursday night, I set up a new trap. I placed a small bag of garbage inside the bin but made sure it rattled when moved. Then I deliberately left the lid slightly ajar as though I had forgotten to close it properly. From my upstairs window I waited. Sure enough, sometime after midnight, Karen returned. This time, her son trailed reluctantly behind her, who'd pulled low over his face. She barked at him to help, and though he looked like he wanted nothing to do with it, he obeyed. Together they grabbed the bin and tried to tip it. The rattling bottles inside made a clamor loud enough to wake the street again. A porch light flicked on down the block, and I heard a neighbor calling out, "What's going on out there?" Karen froze. Her son dropped the handle, and the two of them bolted back toward their house like guilty children. I laughed out loud. This was better than I could have planned. By Friday, word had started to spread. A neighbor stopped me while I was mowing my lawn and asked if I'd been having trouble with the trash cans. I kept my expression neutral and simply said, "Yeah, but I'm handling it." She gave me a curious look but didn't push. I could tell she suspected more was going on that night. I received one final gift from Karen. Around 1 a.m. the tracker on the bin pinged again. I checked the app and saw the dot moving slowly down the street. Heart pounding, I slipped on my jacket, grabbed my phone, and followed at a distance. There they were, Karen and her son, dragging the bin once again. Her son looked exhausted, shoulders slumped, while Karen kept hissing at him to pull harder. I recorded everything from across the street, my phone steady in my hand. They wrestled the bin all the way to the corner, where they tipped it over with a clang and left it lying in the gutter. As they walked away, Karen turned her head, scanning the shadows as though she sensed she was being watched. I ducked behind a tree, silent as stone. Once they were gone, I retrieved the bin, checked the tracker, and wheeled it back home. This time, I didn't just laugh. I felt a deep sense of certainty. The evidence was complete. The pattern was undeniable, and the HOA meeting was only 2 days away. All weekend I prepared. I organized the footage into a slideshow, each clip following the next in perfect order. I practiced what I would say, keeping it calm and factual, resisting the temptation to gloat. I knew I wouldn't need dramatic words. The videos would speak louder than anything I could say. On Sunday evening, as I stood in my driveway taking the bin to the curb, I noticed Karen watching me again, but this time, her expression was different. There was still arrogance there, but beneath it, I caught a flicker of something else, nervousness, maybe even fear. She didn't know what I had, but she must have sensed that her little game was unraveling. I smiled politely, waved, and wheeled the bin into place. She didn't wave back. The stage was set. The next night at the HOA meeting, the curtain would finally rise, and Karen's carefully crafted mask would shatter in front of everyone. The evening of the HOA meeting arrived faster than I expected. I had been rehearsing my words in my head all day, but as I walked toward the community center with my laptop tucked under my arm, I felt a steady rhythm in my chest. Nervous, yes, but more than that, I felt ready. For weeks, Karen had made a game out of tormenting me, dragging her son into her bitterness. Tonight, all of that would finally come to light. The meeting room was already half filled when I arrived. Folding chairs were lined up in rows, and neighbors sat chatting in small clusters. At the front, the HOA board arranged papers and shuffled notes, preparing the evening's agenda. I found a seat near the middle, plugging my laptop into the projector cable I had requested ahead of time. Karen arrived 10 minutes later, striding in with her son trailing behind. She was dressed sharply, her chin high, as though she were preparing to argue a legal case. She scanned the room, her eyes brushing over me, then lingered on my laptop. I could almost feel the shift in her expression, calm confidence cracking into suspicion. Her son didn't meet anyone's eyes. He pulled his hood tighter and slouched into a chair in the back. The meeting started with routine business budget updates, landscaping schedules, a complaint about the pool rules. My leg bounced impatiently as the minutes dragged. Finally, the HOA president announced, "We've received a request to review ongoing issues of property damage within the neighborhood. One of our residents has prepared evidence. The floor is yours." That was my cue. I stood, connected my laptop to the projector, and clicked open the first file. The screen at the front of the room flickered to life, and there, larger than life, was Karen and her son tipping over my old plastic bin. Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered, "Is that?" Another whispered, "No way." I kept my voice calm, steady, almost clinical. For the past several weeks, my property has been repeatedly damaged. At first, I thought it was animals or accidents, but when the problem persisted, I installed cameras. What I discovered was deliberate vandalism, not by strangers but by my neighbors. I clicked to the next video, Karen smirking while her son kicked the bin, then another, both of them dragging the steel bin, grunting with the effort, and another, Karen alone, crouching at midnight, wrestling with the bin until porch lights flicked on. The room grew quieter with each clip, the evidence building like a storm. By the time the final video played, the one of them hauling the bin to the corner and tipping it, her voice faintly audible hissing instructions. The silence was heavy, broken only by uncomfortable shifting in chairs. When the screen went black, I let the quiet hang. Then I said simply, "This is harassment. It's targeted, and it's unacceptable." All eyes turned to Karen. Her face was red, her lips pressed so tightly they looked bloodless. For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Then she laughed, sharp and forced. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Those videos are taken out of context. We were just moving it because it was blocking the street. Anyone could see that." Her son muttered something under his breath, but she shot him a glare, silencing him. The HOA president cleared his throat. "Karen, with all due respect, it doesn't look like you're helping a neighbor. It looks like vandalism, and it looks deliberate." Several neighbors nodded. Someone whispered loudly, "She's always causing trouble." Another added, finally caught Karen's composure cracked. "You're all against me. He's twisting this, making me look bad. I've lived here for years enough." The president interrupted, firm. "We can all see the recordings. Property destruction is against HOA rules and against basic decency. You and your son will be fined, effective immediately, and if it continues, further action will be taken." The murmur of agreement that rippled through the room was like a wave washing over me. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. Her power, the smugness, the intimidation was gone. She sank back into her chair, fuming, her son staring at the floor. I sat down slowly, exhaling the breath I'd been holding. Relief spread through me, not triumphant or gloating, but solid, like a weight finally lifted. My neighbors gave me nods of quiet support. A few even clapped me on the shoulder after the meeting ended, muttering things like, "Good for you," and "It's about time someone stood up to her." Karen stormed out before the meeting adjourned, her son trailing behind like a shadow. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. The damage she had tried to inflict on me had backfired, and now the entire neighborhood had seen her for what she truly was. That night, I wheeled my steel bin back to its spot by the curb. The air was crisp, the street quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the need to watch from my window, didn't feel the twitch of nerves every time my phone buzzed. The game was over, and I had one dot the next morning. My trash bin stood exactly where I had left it, tunched, upright, unbroken. When I stepped outside to sip my coffee, a few neighbors waved from across the street. Even Mr. Hayes gave me a thumbs up. Across the way, Karen's curtains twitched, but she didn't step outside. She wouldn't, not anymore. I smiled, sipped my coffee, and enjoyed the peace I had earned. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't yelling, or fighting, or sinking to someone else's level. Sometimes, it's patience, it's strategy, and it's letting the truth speak louder than any excuse ever could. And that's exactly what I did.